absolutely the biggest threat to liberal institutions right now is MAGA authoritarianism. It's dominating the Republican Party. It's a big issue. I do want to come back to that, but maybe we could talk a bit about Tenet and about Russian influence, because part of, let me just frame this a little bit for you, Stephen, so that you can kind of fill you in a little, like kind of where I'm coming from. I was kind of spent like 10 years in the libertarian movement. Okay, there have been articles that have come out, and I don't use the word libertarian anymore. I use the word classical liberal. I just use the word liberal actually to define my viewpoint. I think I watched the libertarian movement get like totally co-opted by like pro MAGA groups a couple years ago. I have read articles that have alleged that like Ron Paul's entire 2012 campaign was like astroturf by Russia, and then now we've got all these stories about the DOJ, not stories, this indictment, this Tenet indictment from the DOJ, basically saying that Lauren Chen was like giving money from the Russian government in order to boost Russian narratives. So how much do you think these MAGA narratives are like astroturfed, and this red pill movement is astroturfed? And like, just do you have any like broad thoughts on that? On like why it's so ascendant right now in society?
People need to stop seeing these as dichotomies, and they need to see them as multiplicative or additive or whatever, right? People sometimes will come in and they'll say, "Is that movement astroturfed, or is that like legitimate belief?" No, 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 no. You astroturf to create the legitimate belief. Both things are happening simultaneously. I think that a lot of the MAGA stuff, especially, I mean, like you look like the trans boxer or any of the basically any like big culture wars thing, which we saw from the Mueller indictments, from the Russian investigation, where Mueller showed, by the way, that Trump's campaign was colluding with people in Russia. You saw that how Russia operates these accounts, how they push on these social issues in order to divide us on these like particular topics. A lot of it can be astroturfed and pushed, but then once it's astroturfed, conservatives, since their mind is so ripe for intellectual, okay, since you can mind them so easily, they take to these narratives and then they legitimately go out into the world and then they propagate it, like it was told to them by their great-great-great-grandfather. So yeah, I think a lot of it begins astroturfed, but conservatives are just so easy to yank the chain on, and then they'll chase it like a cat going after a laser pointer down the hallway. They'll just run as hard and as fast as they can towards it. So it matters. It might have started off astroturf, but a lot of it is legitimate now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely correct. I mean, you see like all these like right-wing nationalist populist groups which came about, and like very quickly you've seen, like, look at TPUSA. What's their catchphrase? Free markets, limited government, like individual liberty. Like, is that visible in any of their rhetoric? I don't know if it was before, but it certainly isn't now. Charlie Kirk never even says the words free markets anymore. He talks about tariffs, and he talks about all these social cultural issues. And it seems like, the Trump movement created just a couple talking heads like Tucker Carlson, and very quickly all these people just flipped on a dime. You see Vivek Ramaswamy trying to, tie the bow and connect it. He says, and JD Vance says the same stuff, which is, whenever times are good, yeah, we can have freedom, but times are bad now. And so now we can't afford to actually all this freedom stuff.
Yeah.
We need the state to support us in this war, fight for our very existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super cringe that it's like when you think of like history books and you read it, you're like, how do these fucking idiots like fall for Hitler? Like, LOL, how stupid must the Germans have been? And then like you look at Donald Trump and he's like, the media is the enemy of the people. And it's like, oh, well,
Yeah,
like it's like the most fashy 101 type of statement you could ever make. Like, Jesus, that's a pretty extreme thing for the president of the United States to say, I'm going to sue all the media so they can't criticize me. Okay, that's kind of weird. Yeah, it's just, it's beyond like ridicule. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's honestly really shocking to me to watch. I mean, I guess it's very disturbing to me to watch the mainstreaming of authoritarianism and then just see it regurgitated. The thing that blows me away is like I see it regurgitated. To your point about things being astroturf, like then breaking into the national consciousness and like being part of just everyday discourse for decades. Like I have family members I interact with that are repeating these narratives that are completely like well-meaning people that just read these things online. Like they get caught into these kind of like pipelines, and then it is just part of the dominant discourse. And I've heard these things for years, and they get more and more and more and more radical and more and more and more authoritarian. It's very, very concerning. Do you feel like a lot of this stuff on the right, like, I mean, the engagement numbers that these people are getting is crazy. Do you think that, I mean, I have an assumption about this, and I'm going to assume where you might go with this, but like this Russian money, this whole nexus of Russian money, I mean, this has got to be a bigger machine and a bigger infrastructure than what's come out with this DOJ.
Well, it is. Didn't they say in another release in that and the was it an FBI, not a report, not an affidavit. Well, they put out something, but they said there were like 600 influencer operations in the U.S. that they'd identified up to that point, right, where they haven't named them yet. So yeah, I mean, it's not surprising at all.
There is this common allegation that liberals are boring, they're centrists, they're moderates, they don't have big solutions. And I think a lot of young people are attracted to kind of extremist ideologies because they promise that things could be way different and way better. What do you think about that? And do you think there's any examples of like really big liberal ideas that we could use to inspire people and attract them to liberalism?
No, you have to do the homework and you have to understand what the fuck is going on. The issue right now is that we're in a society where we have largely solved a lot of simple problems, okay? We typically don't black people, we don't send gay people to conversion therapy, women are allowed to vote and go to school. Like a lot of the very simple stuff we've more or less solved, or we've made a of progress on. So now the questions that are before us are far more complicated and they require a more complicated answer. You're taking a guy, you know, who's in the year 1920 who weighs 400 pounds and he's expecting an Ozempic when what he needs is 2 years of like diet and exercise. When you talk about fixing problems in like say like the black community, like the answer is going to involve caring for the family so that it's not just like a single mom working 3 jobs. It's going to involve like education at an early age. It's going to involve funding for childcare. It's going to probably involve some nutritional or dietary component. It's probably going to involve some changing of like transportation in the city. Like there are all these things that have to be addressed and people are just looking for like the silver bullet. Like why would I waste all this time on a black kid, you know, when he's 0 to 18 when I could just give him affirmative action when he's 19? Like boom, that should solve everything, right? No, right? It's just all of it, and that's just one of like a million things, you know, whether we're talking climate change or vaccine policy or whatever else. Like everything is very, very, very complicated now, and the solutions are equally complicated. And you have to have a good understanding of these things. But when you can just get up there and promise a simple solution to things, yeah, it's way more attractive. And populists are very good at doing that, especially Donald Trump right now. Yeah.
I actually think no, I couldn't agree more. The incentive structure is incredibly complex and it's like 10 times harder to get people to buy in. But I think there's ways, like from a communications perspective, to like brand complicated policy solutions as something simple and digestible.
Right.
And I actually think the YIMBY movement has done a good job of this because like YIMBYism as a philosophy is a diverse slew of different policy options, and many of them, you know, even YIMBYs in the movement don't like have full, like they're not
Right.
all aligned around their ideal solution. But they basically branded it like, oh, we're about building homes, hard stop, and this is how we
Right.
fix the problem. It's a supply side solution. So that's kind of the way I think is best to approach
Right,
it.
right. I mean,
really
it's
dumb
like
it down.
it's land use regulatory reform. Like, what is a parking mandate? Most people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm optimistic. I think that I think you're totally right that the truth is complicated, right? The world doesn't come with like some sort of simple ideological solution. But I think there probably is like a simple liberal story you can tell about like individual empowerment and choice, which can be helpful. And I think that you see that sometimes, right? Like I think like people that advocate for basic income, people that advocate for the child tax credit, that is redistribution, but it's redistribution that puts power in your hands. And there's a lot of examples of that. Like you could talk about healthcare, right? In a lot of countries around the world, liberal parties have created healthcare systems that are universal, but you still have choice. And like that's a really, I think, American thing. You know, like the left talks sometimes
Yeah, but
about
since conservatives are allowed to live in another reality, like a conservative will shamelessly tell you that those healthcare systems are all broken and don't work. Like they'll just tell you this. They'll just say it.
No, I mean, conservatives, that's by far the most most pressing issue. But I think there's also an issue in like certain blue states where like the ideology is wrong. Like you look at a place like California, they get a lot of things wrong. And I think there's special interest group capture and things like that going on at play. But there's also just the ideology of policymakers where they do think of things in kind of like a maybe like a more paternalistic sense. Like there's these problems of like people's choices and we need to come in and like intervene and control them. And maybe there's like a liberal story we can tell about people are the best authors of their own destiny, and the government's role should be to empower them and protect them from one another, which could be effective and lead to a lot of interesting policies like a universal basic income or a means-based basic income or universal healthcare choice and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. You just have to be able to frame it that way that, yeah, generally you're just giving people more options, you're giving people more control. But anytime more government is involved, yeah, people just feel like, oh, it's actually more restrictive. And it's like, okay.
I appreciate that, Destiny.
All right, bye.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.